the only show focused on stars' improvement strategies and the leaders who implement them. This is the Rising Stars with Rex Wallace Show, brought to you by Hyperlift.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Rising Stars. Hey, we are jumping right into part 2 of a 2-part episode around the article "Flaws in the Medicare Advantage Star Ratings." As we talked about in part 1, which hopefully you've seen, Anna sent this article to Mick and me and said, "Hey, let's talk about this." It's an article just to reintroduce it if you don't recall. It's an article written by David Meyers, Amal Trivedi, and Andrew Ryan, researchers and I think contractors with CMS around public policy, and just kind of identifying what they're seeing as some faults in the star ratings program. And,
but not the David Meyers that we all know and love.
Yeah, not, as we said before, it's not the David Meyer that we know. It's David Meyers with an S on the end, and a PhD and assistant professor, I think, of public policy. So yeah, good point. So hey, Anna, welcome back. Hey, Mick, good to have you again.
So happy to be here. Yeah.
So last time in part 1, we spent most of our time. It's not a long article, right? It's 3 pages. First page, kind of background, identifying some general faults. He said, they say we talked a lot about those, and then in page 2 and page 3, which again we'll post the PDF, right, or a link to it or something in the comments when we make these posts, is when they really get into the challenges in the proposal. So let's jump right into the challenges this time. We touched on one in episode 1. Let's talk about the other, I think 3, right? So challenges with rewarding and incentivizing high performance that is meaningful to beneficiaries. So they say, first, it is not clear if the star ratings are actually capturing a higher quality, as several measures in the star rating are reported by the plan themselves, and plans often overstate their performance. I think maybe we did touch on this one briefly, right?
Yep, we did.
In the first.
And we kind of called BS on that, right? We didn't think that was a thing.
Right. We believe that, and we've all, I mean, we've done this for a long time, right? But yeah, we believe strongly that, this data is submitted either through a CMS contractor or submitted from the plan through a certified, audit firm for HEDIS, or right. That we don't see necessarily loopholes in making your data look like you want it to look, per se, right? Like the way that they seem to be describing it in here. It's not just, hey, let's submit our rate. We think our breast cancer screening, Mick, I think you used the example last time, is 88% or something, and with no checks and balances, right? I mean, yeah, that would be our new administration. That's not STARS yet. So sorry.
So I think that's a little shot there. It's similar to a point that they made, I think, like maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs after that, where they talked about, making this change to where there aren't so many measures that are gameable. And, with this crew, sitting here, I think if there were gameable measures, that we'd know about them and figure out, how to optimize this. But I'm truly at a loss. Like, I'm really curious as to which of these measures they think are essentially gameable and not, absolutely tracked in a way that it's just, it is what it is. And it's hard to get around it. Do you guys have any ideas of what measures they could be thinking about there?
Well, I do know what they specifically cited in the article, which was the readmission measure.
Okay.
So we saw that happening, right? We actually did see gaming of that measure, but that's been solved for. And we, since that time period, it doesn't mean that plans can't optimize the way they collect, gather data, and make sure that every hit they have in the door counts, and that, they optimize sample sizes, or they optimize, their data collection methodologies, those types of things. That's all doable and fair game within the rules of the data collection methodology set forth by the rules. But I think this was, implying that there's widespread cheating by plans. And I just don't see that in my day-to-day work.
No.
Which is, I think, what you two are also saying.
Well, you think about the percentage of the plans across the industry that we work with, and we're not seeing that anywhere. So, I think that says enough right there.
Nor is anyone asking me, hey, is there a way to cheat, or how do I cheat?
Right. Right. That's never come up.
Okay. And then second, over 80% of contracts by enrollment are rated 4 stars or higher, which is the threshold needed to earn bonus payments, and a single star rating is assigned to each contract, even when contracts may cover many different states and regions. Local area experiences for members in the same contract may vary significantly. We touched on this a bit too, because I think it's mentioned above.
Yeah.
Right. So the concept that the limitation right now with stars is that it's measured at the contract level, not at the PBP level or anything else. And I know, we've all talked about this before, like, would it be better if it was at the PBP level? It would be more accurate from a geography standpoint, though I think, we talked about before, every measure is not currently reportable at the PBP level. Right. So it would require changes of measures or changes of reporting, which would be pretty massive. But you guys have thoughts on this one?
I think we said agreed.
Yeah.
The limitations, right? But it's better than nothing. It's better than no, than not measuring at all. And the reality is, when you see how plans are approaching their measures, they realize areas where they have, large swaths of population that aren't performing well, where there's either health equity gaps, or they have network gaps, or some other sort of gaps that they need to address, and then they go there and address them, because that membership, they can't use a one-size-fits-all intervention. They have to go address that membership, because that's the membership that's dragging the measure. So you have to think about it both ways. The fact that it's reported at the contract level, well, plans don't love that either, right? Because I have different situations in different areas of the country, and I have to react and go point certain interventions at the local, at a more local level. So I think either way, it's still reflective of the work that the plan has to do to improve, because certain parts of the population, geographically, if they're not doing well, they're going to drag the performance on the measure. So it really forces concentrated effort in areas that need it.
Yeah, I think we see it quite often, where the plans start looking at the maps and understanding star ratings by, county, or, so that they can identify areas where they got to go put in different interventions to drive performance. But I think that this is part of it. In this article, it seems to be very geared toward making sure that the members have the information that they need to help them, to enable them to make the right choice of plan for them. And so, yes, it would be fantastic if you could offer, the star ratings and a lot more insight at that more granular level. It's just, the level of effort, it's going to take a lot more data collection and validation and that kind of thing. And just a lot more regulatory reporting, and everything comes along with that. It's not just a quick, let's change the focus and everything's there.
Okay, third and last challenge. While bonus payments for star ratings are costly, plans eligible for enhanced bonuses have not shown greater improvement in measures related to clinical quality or administrative effectiveness.
I'll defer to you guys on that, because you've got the data to prove that right or wrong.
I'm somewhat unclear of what the point is they're trying to make here, because if you look at the high performing plans, they are high performing because they are outperforming the other pieces, and you're seeing that performance kind of across the board. So I'm not clear on what they're saying in terms of, he did say not showing the level of improvement.
Right.
But you would expect to see less improvement at a higher performing plan simply because there's less room for improvement. Already outperforming everyone, it does. Like we've seen, the whole reason you have the hold harmless at 4 stars right now is because there is an understanding that it is harder to improve once you're kind of at that upper echelon of performance.
I think that's the key point. Yeah, I think I think, and we could all make the numbers say, we could tell a story, right, of our choosing with the numbers. But I think like purely if you're just looking at the level of improvement, the rate of improvement for the higher performing plans versus low performing plans over the years since stars came into play. Yeah, I subscribe to what Mick is saying, that it's not realistic to think that plans that are already in the upper thresholds of the performance range are going to improve at a rate equal to or higher than plans that are lower. So, yeah, it feels like it's not a strong argument to me.
Well, it's not what we're trying to measure at that point. We're trying to measure overall performance, not improvement per se.
Okay. So then, those are the key challenges. I just want to recap those. I know we talked about them a little bit last time, but now if we get to the money pages, right? It's a section called "Making the Star Ratings Work for Beneficiaries and CMS." Talks about how CMS has nearly complete authority to modify all aspects of stars. Talks about MedPAC and some other think tanks that have recommended changes, and this is kind of recapping some of those key changes, right? So I think there are four of them, and then a couple of recap comments. So the four proposed changes to make stars better. Okay, first, rather than using the current long list of measures that may be gameable in the current system, CMS could consider reducing the number of measures to fewer, more relevant options, as others have recommended. While plans favor removing compliance measures, MedPAC and others suggest including more universal quality measures such as readmission rates, which I think is already in there. In our view, measures should be based on outcomes salient for beneficiaries that can aid in their decision making. This could include rates of prior authorization and claim denials, network adequacy, and access to care, and reported negative experiences with plans. I know we touched on some of this too, right? And I know what I was saying was readmissions are already in there, so I don't know what, if they're looking for more, or if they're just using that as an example, right? More quality measures where outcomes are important, such as readmissions. Obviously important. We have several of them in there now. Talked about prior authorization. I think we all said, yeah, that would probably be good to add. It's in queue already. It's been proposed. I think it's been proposed, but it's in the it's definitely being considered in the future, right? Prior authorizations, just getting plan feedback on it.
Yep.
And then denials, claim denials, network adequacy, access to care, and negative experiences. The negative experiences we talked about, we have complaints already. CTMs is a measure. So reported negative experiences with the plan and with the drug plan they both count heavily towards stars already. Now we don't have grievances, which that's a much bigger pool of negative experiences than complaints. Complaints are the most, I guess, egregious. Maybe it's the ones that where the member actually calls CMS to notify them of the grievance against the plan, if you will, as opposed to just calling customer service and saying, I'm not happy. So maybe there's opportunity, to include grievances or the grievance rate or something like that. You guys jump in here. What are your thoughts here?
I really like that they mentioned the universal measures, right? Because when you think about, what it takes to do well in star ratings, it's really a partnership between the health plan, the provider network, and really its membership. How well do we communicate with our members to help them understand the value of showing up for preventive care and being a team with the health plan and keeping themselves healthy or maintaining their health. So I think from a universal measures perspective, when you think about lines of business, there's so many health plans that don't just have the Medicare Advantage line of business. They have multiple lines of business. And so it simplifies their quality efforts so much when those measures are like a thread that they can pull across all their lines of business and really optimize the types of interventions they do, the communication they do, the investments that they make in people, process, technologies across their lines of business, because the universal measure pulls through all of them. So I think that's an important point that they make. CMS has recognized that. We see everything about, we see a lot of talk about the universal measure set, not just in proposed rules, but also they refer to it like in the advance notice, in the final notices that we've been seeing lately over the last few years. Those have been a predominant feature, talk about the universal measure set. So I think that's an important thing. The other thing that I recognize is something that we say all the time amongst ourselves, that if you connect members with the care, medicines, and information they need when they need it, that's really what they're saying about the measures that measure things that are salient to members. Those are the things that are salient to members, right? Are you paying my claim? Are you answering the phone and answering my questions, giving me the info that I need? And can I get the medicines that I need, right? That my doctor has prescribed for me. Those are all the things, the minimum operational things that a health plan has to do. And I think that's what the article is really like leaning into. Like, those are the salient things for members. And we have a lot of those things now, right? In star ratings themselves. I think what they're proposing is create a simplified set of measures, not this large number with really intricate methodology applications to it.
I think it makes a lot of sense to do the universal set, because I think your point's well made, Anna. Just the ability to enable plans to focus, across lines of business more easily, and really put efforts to driving improvement that can benefit kind of across the spectrum, as opposed to in just one area. I think it makes a lot of sense.
So a smaller number of relevant measures that are not gameable is what they're saying. So the
back to the gameable thing, though, I think that's a red herring. You know what I mean? I don't think there's a lot of measures out there that are measurable. They're optimizable. And I think that work that plans do around the edges to optimize really does make a difference. Let's say between 4 and 5 stars, for example, it does make a lot of difference, that work that plans do around the edges to optimize. But I, again, really bristle against the concept of gameable measures.
I absolutely do too. I mean, there are things like you're saying, Anna, that are optimizable, but it's, you'll see benefit where plans put a real focus on the quality improvement measures and understanding the kind of moves that you have to get there. Because again, moving from a 3 to a 4 or a 3 to a 5, in these 5-weighted QI measures makes a big impact. But I wouldn't call that gameable, and that's definitely not kind of the typical measures that we're talking about. But it is understanding how do you optimize your score. But I think that's very different than the picture that's being portrayed as a bunch of gameable measures, which I just think is inaccurate.
Me too. I think gameable, as when we've ever referred to anything in stars being gameable, it's more about it being a puzzle, right? And being able to put it to, or like you guys are saying, optimizing. It's a math problem that can be worked in different ways in understanding like the improvement measure impact, like the most efficient way, the most effective way for the fewer number of measures to give you the highest score. Like, there are things you can do, of course, because there are weights and calculations and formulas, right, to optimize
decisions you make, right, in CAHPS. what did I do during the year, and how does that inform my decision as to whether I'm going to oversample or not? That do you know what I'm saying? Like that
Right.
to me,
Right.
those types of things are, or how can I make sure that the placement of drugs on my formulary is optimal so that I can create better access for my members and improve adherence rates.
As opposed to like the street definition of gameable, which would imply more cutting corners and doing things that are.
I'm going to report the wrong rate. No one. Don't see that, right?
Right. I want to give these people more credit than what I'm feeling because they're researchers or contractors with CMS. We should probably have them on, right? And actually talk through.
Well, I wonder, right? They may be looking at some areas. So, for example, plans that understand the numerator and denominator rules for HEDIS data collection very, very well will avoid including members in their denominator that don't need to be there, and they'll ensure that they understand the rules very well so that they avoid not counting members in their numerator that really needed to be counted. If you're going to call that gaming, I don't see that as gaming. I see that as understanding the rules very well and, turning in a paper with 100 on it versus a 97 because you didn't dot all your I's and cross all your T's and put all your periods and commas in place, and your teacher, docked you a couple points.
Right.
That's a big difference than gaming, right?
Right.
Just outright
it is. I mean, frankly,
correctly. I just don't see that.
Yeah. What you just said is I don't look at gaming at all. It's actually making sure that you're as accurate as you can be based on the rules that have been applied. I think it makes complete sense.
Totally agree. Okay. Second proposal. CMS should end its grade inflation to allow beneficiaries to discern high and low performing plans. Other CMS rating systems, such as the Nursing Home Compare Star ratings, roughly follow a normal distribution, with most nursing homes scoring about 3 and true high and low performers at either end of the scale. CMS could consider using a similar strategy for assigning stars, which may help to reduce spending on ratings as fewer contracts would fall into the bonus category. Relatedly, MedPAC has suggested that measures should follow a more continuous distribution rather than include the arbitrary cutoffs that are used.
Arbitrary,
right? Like I'm sorry, but if it feels like they don't understand how the cut points are calculated, right?
Well, they used to have an arbitrary cutoff, right? They used to have. It wasn't really arbitrary, but remember when they had the 4-star threshold, and if you made that number, you knew what number you were trying to peg to, right? If you got there, that was that.
Well, and I'm still, again, like I feel like I've said this on a lot of their points. I don't really understand what they're looking at because, when they talk about kind of a regular distribution, if you look at the kind of the breakout of, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars, there is a regular looking distribution, not a perfect kind of, curve on this, but it's definitely higher in the middle, and all the changes that they're actually putting in place right now, getting rid of reward factor, bringing in HEI, it is increasing the height of the number of plans in the kind of the 3 and the 4 categories. That 3, 3.5, 4. If you look at what all these other changes from CMS coming in right now, post those changes, there are tiny number of plans on the outside of 3, 3.5, and 4. So are you guys seeing something different from what I'm seeing, or like what they might be going after there at the point of not seeing a normal distribution?
I was going to say at the measure level, agree, right? Like measure levels with the clustering and the normal distribution, it looks like looks like that what they're proposing, right? Like it is a normal distribution. I feel like inside a measure, but like you're saying with the reward factor, like there are these incentives that CMS has put in place, and I think it's actually part of what makes the program even more impactful and more effective, right? Is that it does have these incentives to help you if you are high performing. It gives you a reward factor and makes you even more high performing. So it does. I think normally in a normal year before the last few years, half 50% of contracts are 4 stars or higher, right? If we don't say member weighted, but just purely the contracts, about half of them are high performing. That's actually pretty normal, right? I think 50 above the line, 50 below the line. Anna, what were you going to say?
Well, let's go back to our original point from episode 1 of this, right? So this point that they're making really highlights that tension between the two parts of star ratings of what it was meant to do, right? So you really want relative performance in order to give members a way to differentiate plans one from another. You want relative performance. You want to be able to compare them against each other. But if you recall, as we talked about, the second part was that star ratings were supposed to replace the revenue that was clawed back as a result of the Affordable Care Act's reduction in premium. And plans were told, if you operate at a high quality level, you have an opportunity to earn those dollars back. And that means that there's some threshold established for what that quality level is. And so when plans rose to the occasion, that they got their money back, right? Like they earned at that level of those original benchmarks, and plus in some cases based on the way that the rules were set up for star ratings. So it's almost like there's a tension or a conflict between those two purposes. They're at odds with each other. That absolute performance to replace the revenue, relative performance to give beneficiaries an opportunity to differentiate one plan from the other. And so I don't know that conflict is solvable under the current framework, but that's why these conversations continue to pop up and why they're so interesting.
The only piece that I would be interested in y'all's thoughts on, I don't know it's totally related here, so either one of you feel free to say, let's save this for another session. But like I've always loved the reward factor. It creates so much interesting dynamicness, as you're going through a lot of this. But reality is, for so many years, it was the thresholds didn't even kick in until you were above 4 stars anyway. So, and a lot of it was kind of the thing that pushed most plans into 5 stars. So without that, you just have a lot more in the 4.5. That would be the only one that I could maybe see some of the point here in that, why are you doing some of that? Because really, what's the impact? Why do we need to reward the consistently high performing, kind of across the board? I guess the whole point is they want to reward plans that have consistent high performance across all the measures. They're not just focusing on one. But I'm trying to, like you were saying, Rex, kind of give a little, additional credence than what my initial reactions are. So that's the only one that I think could jump out to where you might challenge as to why are we putting that in. But that also has been removed from stars. So maybe, again, not worthy of discussion.
I think it's the key way that a non-normal distribution exists, right? Is because of the reward factor. I think, but also like I wonder about the improvement measures too, right? Like are those? I mean, you're talking 2 5-weight measures, right? That are, and when you think about the reward factor and how when CMS first introduced the reward factor, it was called the I factor, right? The integration factor, I think is what it was called. But it was because they thought plans. I think it's because they thought plans were gaming the system, but only right. Improving on a few measures and not across the board, right? And it was creating an inconsistent experience for members. So they wanted to create a really compelling incentive for plans to have low variance across measures and have them all be consistent from an experience standpoint. But I think the improvement measures do create some skew in the distribution, right? I would think.
Well, I think the improvement measures can create some skew simply with the hold harmless piece, because there are a lot of 4-star plans that if you had to use them might not be 4 stars anymore. When that first came out,
True.
Probably the biggest year I've ever seen of that. But in 23, when they had first announced that, 36% of the 4-star plans wouldn't have been 4 stars anymore without the hold harmless being there. So I can see that skewing it. I understand why they do it. Like we talked about before, it gets harder to improve as you get higher performing. But I do think you're right, Rex, in that probably is serving to create a bit of skew, towards the upper end.
And the reward factor going away is going to prevent some of this, right? It's going to result in more of a normal distribution. It's going to change the whole distribution of stars, but it's going to result in, I guess, more normalized
stars writ large, not measure by measure stars.
Exactly, right. Yeah, overall rating.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see, as you just pointed out, well, Rex, the whole purpose why did they bring that in? Do we start seeing more of a focus on the higher weighted measures and some of the things that truly are going to move the needle, because you don't have to worry about variance anymore. You don't have to worry about some of the other stuff that the reward factor really was designed to promote.
Yeah.
So let's do another one of these in like 2 years, and we can evaluate the impact.
Let's do it. Okay, two more. So third, CMS may consider calculating regular stratified measures by different subgroups of enrollees in contracts, such as those with greater health needs or significant social risk factors. Understanding and making public the quality of care for different beneficiaries within MA contracts may help beneficiaries make better plan choices. CMS plans to add a health equity adjustment into these star ratings, but stratified measures by additional groups may still lead to more informed plan choices. I know at one time they say, back near the beginning of the article, that because the social risk factors being measured in HEI, are purely disability and low income and dual status, right? So they were making the point that there have been some studies that showed people of color and minorities have a lesser experience, a poorer experience in high performing plans than their white counterparts, right? So I totally agree that there's a lot more we can do from a stratification measure, including race and ethnicity, things we haven't even really been able to do so far. But yeah, what would you guys say here?
If you have the data.
Exactly.
I mean that's really the reason that the HEI is built on what it's built on right now, because those are the best metrics that they have available consistently across the universe. There are a lot of data requirements that don't exist right now. The data that we don't have today that would be required to be able to effectively roll out those other groups.
Right.
And CMS was really clear when they introduced the Health Equity Index that the SRFs, or the social risk factors that they're including this time around, may not be the same ones that they include in the future. And I think, Rex, to your point, or Mick, to your point, it's because this is what's readily available today. Now,
that's right.
Just sticking my finger in the wind, with this administration, do I think there's going to be any sort of different types of social risk factors looked at in the near future? I really don't. I don't see that happening in the near future, just based on the other moves that they've made related to removing data around gaps, health equity gaps based on racial factors. I just don't see that being promulgated via HEI anytime soon.
And yeah, like you guys are saying, we don't have some of that data now. I've heard stories of plans, the way they identified the race and ethnicity of members is sometimes they would get it from their provider groups, and when you ask the provider groups how they got it, some of them said the person at the front desk wrote down what they thought they were when they walked in. We've heard of other plans doing it by the last name, right? Like there's clearly not an effective data set now, not an accurate data set on race and ethnicity and other things that would be really important to measure from a cohort standpoint. So hopefully
more often than not, what I'm seeing in the plans that I work with oftentimes is that they don't even have a field in their system of record to store that type of information, nor even to store a language preference or an alternate format preference for materials. So those are important things that really help you do well in, delivering care and reducing gaps and performing well in measures that would be stratified. And we don't have the data to understand who to point our interventions at, because even if we wanted to collect it, we have no place to put it oftentimes.
It's a great point because, like when we're talking about HEI optimization, Nate talks about this a lot. You have the three groups, but how do you break that down more? Because again, not everyone is homogenous in each one of those groups. So I think that it's just the reality is, I think the plans would love to have that richness of data that's accurate and actionable, just to be able to apply to their own, analyses. So I think it's there. It's just I think the desire is there. Reality is just, how do you collect it in an accurate across the board fashion?
Okay, fourth, Congress should make the STARS program budget neutral, a move that think tanks across the political spectrum as well as MedPAC have promoted. Given weak evidence of impact, the MA STAR rating program's high price tag may not be worth it. Budget neutrality is common in other value-based incentives in traditional Medicare, including the merit-based incentive payment system. Yeah. So I guess, when I read this...
Back to my original comment.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, right? Yeah. Cutting money and cutting revenue and giving them this to earn it back, but then saying it's not budget neutral. And does this mean that this is me thinking, right? Does this mean that lower performing plans would get penalized and have to pay the penalties that end up funding the QBPs that the higher performing plans earn? Like, is that one of the ways that it becomes budget neutral?
Is that even feasible?
I don't know.
We're going to give you less money.
Right.
So you lose money every time you enroll a new member. You're losing money.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't we seeing enough plans dropping out of MA right now?
That's what I would think it would lead to that result, right?
Yeah,
and if that's the intended result, maybe that is the intended result, right? Is to consolidate membership amongst a fewer number of plans. Is that the intended result? Or is it
like an odd intended
to bring
result
in as many plans as we can to provide good quality care under the Medicare Advantage program in areas where people don't normally have access?
Right.
Is that what are the goals? What are we trying to do, right? Because when you ask folks, well, what's a goal in Medicare Advantage program? You get different philosophies. And so I think the payment methodology and by extension, the star ratings methodology that you employ is going to drive whatever your philosophical view of MA is as to what it's here to do.
And they say clearly at the top, the success of the program depends on whether the ratings shape beneficiaries' choices and if the bonuses generate quality improvements that are meaningful to beneficiaries. So,
they don't just have to be meaningful to beneficiaries, though. I posit to you that they have to be meaningful to the government. And what I mean by meaningful to the government is ultimately it has to provide the benefit, the Medicare benefit, in a more efficient, cost-effective, higher quality way than original Medicare. That's really what we should be looking at, are those comparisons, right?
From an MA standpoint, yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's a good point, because we have to agree with kind of the premises that they're saying at the beginning of the article. I think that's a lot where we saw challenges, is though the goals that they kind of stated at the beginning aren't necessarily the way we would look at the objectives of the STARS program. It's evaluating it differently.
And it was, I don't know, I always say, and I've always read, I thought that, the purpose of the Star Ratings program was largely to give beneficiaries an indicator of the quality of the health plan that they wanted to enroll in, something to compare options more so, something that wasn't purely financial, that wasn't just the premium or the annual out-of-pocket cost or things like that, but something that reflects the experience that I'll have if I join this plan. I mean, if simplification is good, but if you take away caps, which is imperfect, but it's one of the few things that really assesses the experience, right? The patient experience, the member experience. So if we're going to help beneficiaries understand the experience of the plan that they're thinking about enrolling in, it's got to be more than just clinical outcome measures, right? So I don't know. Like, we need to design. Let's just design our own.
Should we propose our own methodology?
We totally should. Yeah.
Okay, you heard it here. Start sending suggestions to Rex. Comment below.
Right. Yeah. A few more things. So that's the meat of it, right? But then they do say, plans have argued that the inclusion of metrics should follow a more rigorous and predictable process.
Are you kidding?
more rigorous than 2 years of rulemaking, right? Okay.
I mean, they start talking about it. This is what we're thinking about generally, right? We see that, right? They start talking advance notice, like 3 or 4 or 5 years before. Sometimes this is what we're thinking. And then they go through this entire public comment, proposed rule. They put the measures on the display. You could see how other plans are doing. The first year, their weighted one.
I feel like this was some of the things in this article make me feel like it was written 10 years ago, right? Like,
right.
Because it's gotten better, right? Like CMS, the rulemaking aspect has existed, but there wasn't, but CMS was not so good early on at notifying us before a measurement period of what the measures were going to be. They've gotten much better at that.
Of course.
But yeah, I'm with you. It's pretty rigorous now and predictable, I feel like. Unless we're talking 10 years down the road, right? But we do have 2 years of notice on just about everything.
Everyone knows I'm not a big defender of CMS when there's lack of transparency. So for example, in the HEI, where we have the black box as to how they are adjusting, some of those calculations that they're doing in the background, that we don't really know what goes into that cake mix that they're doing to come out with the cake at the end. That's the only issue I take with, in terms of, I think there should be more transparency. Other than that, I do think that, there is transparency generally. There are some other areas where I think there isn't a lot, but just in the minutia, right? Now, those things have huge implications often, right?
And they're being called out in lawsuits too, right? So
right. So we talked a little bit about that earlier, is that when plans don't trust the data, right? Like, hey, how did you get to this number when there is an imperfect disclosure of here's how we got here, in a way that plans can't go do their own math and verify that. Or when you hear anecdotally from plans like, hey, we brought up to them that this didn't look right to us. They didn't share with us the math, but they corrected our score. In those, I think that breeds a mistrust of the scoring system, not for beneficiaries, but for plans and data teams that are tasked with making sure that the star ratings score has integrity, that there's integrity in the system. And I think that lack of trust that that has come about in the last couple of years, it has been what has been fueling a lot of the court actions that we have seen.
Which isn't surprising, when you have the kind of the black box where you can't recreate the calculation, but the difference means tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, it just makes sense that you're going to reach that level of frustration that's going to end up in a lawsuit these days.
Exactly. It's the recipe for it, right?
But that's a little bit different point, I think, than what the authors of this article are making, which is, I think,
agreed.
What we were talking about at the beginning of this part of the discussion, which has to do with, do they give us enough notice about what measures are going to be included, what the methodology for those measures are going to be? I think they do. Do I wish that they were more transparent about the calculation methodologies? Yes, 100% that needs to happen. But in terms of which measures and what's the methodology for the measures, I think we do get that information.
And what's coming, what are we contemplating? Yeah, there's a ton of notice that comes out. Like, we do know it well before anything actually hits the application.
Yeah. Now, I will say part of the issue is because there are several places where CMS publishes this information. And we've talked about some of them, right? The advance notice, the final notice, proposed rules, final rules. The measure stewards themselves come up with periods of public comment for the measures as they're authoring new measures and looking at changes. And so plans have a variety of sources to go, that they have to really look at in order to say, okay, I know what is going on, instead of one unified place where they could look to see, okay, here's what's coming. And, when the information is published, it's like in dribs and drabs, right? And so you're looking across a bunch of different cycles of advance notice, proposed rules, final rules, right? And so it's really difficult to see what's new, what's changing, what's being eliminated over a period of time. The reason that's so critical is because plans are planning for a star rating 2-3 years from now. They're executing on a star rating that's going to be in place 2 years from now, right? And they're and they're living with a star rating that they performed a while back. So understanding those timelines is really important. I know that we take great pains to create, sheets and sheets of this is what's happening year by year. And I think that's difficult for plans to do, and CMS should be more clear with that information.
I think your point's a good one. But the other reality kind of goes along with that is these advance notice comes out, or the different notifications about potential changes. They're 700 pages, they're 1,300 pages, and just sifting through to figure out what makes sense. That's why you got to participate in RWC's Stars Council, where it just kind of breaks it down. Go to some of the events that you do, at conferences. But maybe what we should do is we should get the kind of faux CMS updates website, and we'll just create one that has that spreadsheet that's going down. Here are the changes that are coming. Here are the potential ones. Here we'll bring in the analysis that we do that impacts, here's what the impact could mean to your contract, because I think it makes a lot of sense to have it in one spot and just make it easy for plans to take a look at and be able to internalize and understand how they need to be reacting to it.
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, the other point of this is that we still have several provisions that were proposed, and now a couple of final rule cycles have come out, and they did not put those proposals to rest one way or the other to say we are adopting it or we're not adopting it. And so often, plans are thinking these swords of Damocles are hanging over their heads. Right.
Yeah, QI hold harmless being probably the biggest one.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, right? So,
yeah.
I think they do need to do a better job of either, more definitively saying, yes, we're adopting it, or not, we're not.
Yeah, we're over this. Yes.
Right. You can't lean in on the framework of proposed rules, right? You can't lean in on the rulemaking process and then leave it hanging out there for an extended period of time without, one way or the other, reserving the right to implement it like that. That's really not what it's intended to do, I don't think.
Hey, I know we're at time. Last question, and give me a 15-second answer on this because we're about out of time. But I'm okay. So when I read through this article, right, or MedPAC, or like proposed changes from think tanks, right, a few things. But one, like my company, we and like you guys, right, we advise health plans on how to be good at star ratings, right? How to understand it, how to optimize it, how to
game it.
And the health plans on behalf of the Medicare Advantage members, who are, I can truthfully and sincerely say, are always top of mind for us. When I see an article like this, I'm trying to think, like, who is it written on behalf of? Because I don't feel like it's written on behalf of Medicare Advantage plans that serve the members, and I don't necessarily feel like it's. I mean, I guess maybe they're saying it's on behalf of beneficiaries, but I don't know that I really feel that. But what do you guys have a quick thought on that before we go?
My sense when I read it was kind of a rebuke to the government. Look how you're wasting our taxpayer money on this, on these bonus programs that don't really measure quality, and it's just a way to funnel money to Medicare Advantage plans, right? Like to me, that was the tone that the article took. And I think to some extent why I found so much fault with some of the premises in the article, when you really pulled on those threads, like gameable measures as an example of one of the things that we brought up, right? They had a lot of really interesting things to say. I do think the ideas around, hey, let's make the measures be the meaningful ones, is an interesting conversation and really a worthwhile conversation. But, some of the points that they made for me were not helpful.
Right. Agree.
Yeah, I just couldn't connect the dots on some of the initial points. Like I didn't agree with the fundamental premise that they were making, and definitely couldn't then make the leap to the final conclusion. Some of the things that they talked about, to me, it felt like I actually agree with the key pieces of Anna's points. I think that makes a ton of sense. And if I were going to give any kind of if altruistic, like what were they really going after in a perfect sense, was I think trying to make it more accessible for members to be able to pick the right plans, to make sure that they're getting the care that they want to. But the reality is, and this is just maybe a challenge in getting there, but a lot of what they're proposing, the data simply doesn't exist today to support things like that. Because I think fundamentally it'd be fantastic to provide additional insights, more meaningful pieces of information for members. But at least at the way they were kind of slicing and dicing it, that data doesn't exist today in a consistent way.
Right. Okay. Well, we got to go with that. But yeah, Anna, thanks for joining us. Thanks for sending this article. Looking forward to getting this posted and getting some feedback and see what people think. So definitely got our juices flowing now.
Always fun to talk about these with you.
Good to have you. Okay. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk next time.
Thanks, guys.
As a Medicare Stars professional, you're on a mission to boost your plan's ratings. But complex data and endless metrics make it more than challenging. Enter Stars Monitor by Hyperlift, your guide to improved performance. Our dashboards pinpoint your most impactful opportunities. By focusing on what truly matters, you'll avoid the pitfall of missed targets and achieve the goal of steady improvement. Take the first step towards your Stars success story. Email results@hyperlift.com for a free demo. Stars Monitor by Hyperlift, providing speed to clarity.